As we've discussed in previous videos in this series, in order for a community to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, it must adopt a floodplain management ordinance that meets the minimum requirements of the NFIP. The NFIP requires the community to establish a local permitting process for any development that occurs in the mapped special flood hazard area. Prior to the start of any development in the special flood hazard area, all necessary federal, state, and local development permits must be obtained. In this video, we will address local floodplain development permitting through the Floodplain Management Ordinance, development regulations in the Floodway and Floodway Fringe, and some common exemptions to development regulations. These key terms and acronyms will be used during this presentation. You can find the terms and their definitions at the web address on screen. The NFIP defines development as any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, drilling operations, or storage of equipment or materials. As you can see, this definition is quite broad. Any development proposed to be located in the special flood hazard area requires a floodplain development permit from the local community. The community's ordinance requires that development in the special flood hazard area must also obtain any other permits that may be required by federal, state, or local governments before construction begins. As was discussed in video 9 of this series, the floodway is the portion of the floodplain that must be left unobstructed to allow the discharge of the base flood event without increasing flood heights. And while development can be allowed in the floodway, it cannot result in any increase in the base flood elevation. Local ordinances typically permit activities such as agricultural uses, recreational uses such as golf courses, residential uses such as lawns and parking areas, and other open space uses similar to those just mentioned, so long as they do not include the placement of structures, fill, and other obstructions in the floodway. Other types of development may only be allowed when it is demonstrated that they will not result in any increase in flood stages. Applications for proposed development in the floodway must include certification by a registered professional engineer that the project will result in no rise in the base flood elevation. A no-rise certificate ensures that the development project will not increase flood heights. The floodway fringe is that portion of the identified special flood hazard area located outside of the floodway. Local regulations allow most types of development in this area, provided that the development satisfies the criteria outlined in the community's floodplain management ordinance. The criteria are designed to ensure, among other things, that the development will not be damaged by the base flood event. In this video, we will only discuss the requirements for buildings built in the floodway fringe. Elevation is one method that is used to protect buildings located in the floodway fringe from damage by flood, and is the only acceptable method for protecting new or substantially improved residential structures. The community's floodplain management ordinance requires that the lowest floor for residential structures, including recreational cabins and factory-built homes, must be elevated at or above the base flood elevation. The NFIP considers the floor of a building's lowest enclosed area, including basement, to be the lowest floor for both regulatory and insurance rating purposes. Elevation is typically achieved through the use of fill, piers, posts, or columns. The lowest floor can also be elevated on walls, crawl spaces, or other similar above-ground enclosures. However, in order for these enclosures to not be considered lowest floor, they must be constructed using materials such as concrete that are resistant to damage by flood. The enclosed area must be unfinished, no carpet, paneling, or drywall, and used solely for low-damage potential uses such as parking, building access, or storage. Utilities such as furnaces, circuit breakers, and water heaters must be elevated at or above base flood elevation, or be protected by watertight enclosures, utility shafts, or anchoring systems. Walls must include openings or vents placed on at least 2 walls that are sufficient to allow water to automatically enter and exit the building to help reduce hydrostatic pressure on the structure. Doors and windows are not acceptable openings as they do not automatically allow water to flow into and out of the enclosure. And the enclosed area must not be a basement as defined by the NFIP. The NFIP defines a basement as any enclosed area of a building, including any sunken room or sunken portion of a room which has a floor that is below ground level on all 4 sides. This is important because what is typically referred to as a walkout basement is not considered to be a basement as defined by the NFIP, meaning it can be designed and constructed to satisfy the previously discussed criteria for an enclosure below the lowest floor. To ensure that a building has been constructed in compliance with these elevation requirements, communities require the individual proposing the development to provide an elevation certificate. An elevation certificate is a document completed by a licensed surveyor or engineer that attests that the lowest floor of the structure is at or above base flood elevation. In the case of structures elevated on a crawl space or other enclosure, it also confirms whether utilities have been properly elevated and that sufficient vents or openings have been installed in the walls. This information can then be used to ensure compliance with the local floodplain management ordinance or to establish flood insurance premiums. For non-residential buildings, structural floodproofing methods are an acceptable option for providing flood protection. In order for a structure to be considered structurally floodproofed, it must be designed, along with utilities and sanitary facilities, to be watertight. The structure's walls and floors must also be designed to resist the buoyant and dynamic forces associated with the base flood. To ensure that proposed floodproofing measures satisfy these criteria, communities require the individual proposing the development to provide a floodproofing certificate. Certain accessory structures, such as residential detached garages or sheds, may be exempted from building elevation requirements if they meet certain criteria. Eligible structures may not be used for human habitation and must be firmly anchored to prevent flotation. Recreational vehicles can also qualify for an exemption from elevation requirements. A recreational vehicle is defined as a vehicle that has been built on a single chassis, that is 400 square feet or less in size, and that is self-propelled or towable. To qualify for an exemption from the elevation requirements, a recreational vehicle must be fully licensed and ready for highway use and located on one site for less than 180 consecutive days. A recreational vehicle is considered to be ready for highway use when it is on its wheels or jacking system and only attached to the site by quick disconnect type utilities and has no permanently attached additions. If a recreational vehicle does not meet all of these conditions, then it must comply with extensive elevation and anchoring requirements to ensure that it is protected from the base flood event. Today, you have learned about local floodplain management ordinances and how these ordinances regulate development in the floodway and floodway fringe.